I get it when you're about to drop a six-figure sum on a server you've never touched. The what if I get the wrong box feeling is real. You've probably already scanned a dozen spec sheets, watched a couple of tech demos, and maybe even asked a coworker what they'd pick for a heavy-duty virtualization workload. That hesitation is exactly why I wanted to break this down before you hit Add to Cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the HPE Proliant DL380 you're looking at is marketed as a super high-end virtualization server. The headline numbers: 22 cores, 128 gigabytes of RAM, a full 16 terabytes of 7.2K SAS storage, plus a 10 gigabits Ethernet adapter make it sound like an honest stop shop for every VM you could imagine. But the reality of plugging this thing into a small to mid-sized data center, or even a dedicated home lab, is a bit more nuanced. Let's talk about the core of the machine, the 2.20 GHz Intel Xeon E5-2699V4. Those 22 cores are split across two sockets, which is great if you plan to run multiple hypervisors or keep a few isolated workloads on separate NUMA nodes. In practice, I've seen this configuration handle about 30 to 35 fully loaded Windows Server 2019 VMs with decent headroom, or roughly 45 lighter Linux containers. That's a solid baseline if you're consolidating a handful of legacy services and a few dev environments. The catch? The base clock of 2.20 GHz isn't the fastest you'll find in the current generation. So if your workloads are heavily single-threaded, think a database that isn't sharded or a licensing server that can't spread across cores, you may feel the ceiling sooner than you expect. Memory is where the DL380 starts to feel generous. 128 gigabytes of DDR4 ECC RAM gives you room to allocate 2 to 4 gigabytes per VM comfortably, and the platform supports up to 1.5 terabytes if you ever decide to upgrade. The real value here is the ECC protection. You won't lose a VM to a random bit flip. However, the server ships without any memory modules installed, so you'll need to purchase the DIMMs separately. That's not a deal breaker, but it does add to the total cost of ownership, especially if you need to match the memory speed to the CPU's capabilities. Now the storage. 2 terabytes, 7.2K SAS drives behind an HP Smart Array P440AR controller. In plain English, you get a 12-bay chassis, the 12-bay LFF tag, but only 8 drives populated. The P440AR is a hardware RAID card that supports RAID 0, 1, 5, 6, 10, and a few advanced configurations. For a virtualization host, I'd usually set it to RAID 10 for a balance of performance and redundancy. In real-world testing, that RAID level gives you roughly 150 megabytes per second sequential read/write on the SAS drives, good enough for most VM boot disks, but not the kind of speed you'd expect from an all-flash array. If your workloads involve large data sets, video transcoding, or heavy database I/O, you'll want to add an NVMe or SATA SSD tier as a cache or secondary tier. The server's chassis has space for that, but again, you'll be buying additional hardware. Networking is where the DL380 starts to show why it's aimed at the pro crowd. The 10 gigabits Ethernet 2-port FIO adapter, Model 561 FLRT, slots straight into the PCIe lanes and gives you 2 dedicated 10 gigabits ports out of the box. That's a massive upgrade over the typical 1 gigabit uplink you'd find on lower-end boxes. If you're planning to run a dense VM farm with live migration traffic, or you need to feed the server into a storage area network, those ports will save you a lot of bottleneck headaches. The downside? You'll need a compatible 10 gigabit switch or a direct attach copper cable. Otherwise, you're just paying for speed you can't use. Power and redundancy are covered by the two 800W hot swap power supplies. In a rack environment, that's a plus. You can pull the server out for maintenance without losing uptime. The rails are also included, which means you can mount this unit into a standard 42U rack without buying extra mounting hardware. One thing to note, the 800W rating is just enough for the base configuration. If you start loading all 8 SAS drives, max out the RAM, and add extra PCIe cards, you'll be flirting with the PSUs limit. It won't trip a breaker, but you may see higher electricity usage and slightly louder fan curves. So, who should actually buy this machine? If you're an IT manager at a mid-sized company that needs a single box to host a mixed workload, think a few Windows file servers, a couple of SQL instances, and a development sandbox. This DL380 checks the boxes. It gives you enough cores to avoid contention, enough RAM to keep your VMs responsive, and enough storage to keep everything on premises without resorting to a separate SAN. It also shines for small MSPs that want to spin up multiple client environments on a single physical host while still offering hardware RAID protection and 10 gigabits connectivity for quick